The clock strikes, and your paycheck lands in your account. You breathe a sigh of relief, believing you're finally in control. But here's the truth. Few will ever whisper, "Control is an illusion." Your financial reality is not determined by grand gestures, sudden windfalls, or the meteoric rise of a startup idea. It is shaped by a hidden architecture, invisible to the naked eye, quietly directing the trajectory of your money, moment by moment, by choice. This is the trap. The choices you think are trivial, the decisions you dismiss as inconsequential, are quietly compounding, against you if you ignore them, and for you if you understand the pattern. Consider the physics of a falling object. A feather and a coin, dropped from the same height, appear to behave differently, until you account for air resistance. In finance, so your choices are the forces, your environment, the resistance, and your long-term freedom, the gravitational pull that cannot be denied. Each micro-decision, buying a $5 coffee every morning, delaying a payment, ignoring a minor investment opportunity, is a vector in a complex system. Alone, it seems negligible. Aggregated over months and years, it becomes unstoppable. This is where the system reveals itself. This is why most people never escape. They fail to see the invisible mechanics that govern their financial life. Imagine an iceberg. What you see above the water, your salary, your bank balance, your monthly expenses, is only a fraction of the whole. Below the surface lies the massive structure of decisions, habits, emotional triggers, and silent pressures that dictate the flow of capital in your life. Each choice you make, whether conscious or subconscious, nudges this hidden structure. It is silent, it is relentless, and it is unforgiving. Ignoring it is not just ignorance, it is surrender. Now, let's confront a widely held belief that wealth is the product of luck, talent, or extraordinary intelligence. The narrative is seductive because it absolves personal responsibility. But in reality, luck is the residue of design. Talent matters, but without systematic alignment, it dissipates. Extraordinary intelligence without disciplined application is wasted potential. The system rewards patterns, not brilliance. It rewards consistency, not dramatics. And here lies the secret few ever grasp. Your financial freedom is the cumulative effect of small, repeated, precise actions, each designed to exploit the invisible structure, each compounding quietly toward an eventual tipping point. Picture two individuals. One earns $100,000 a year but spends impulsively, accumulates high-interest debt, and constantly chases the next gadget or experience. The other earns $60,000 but aligns every decision with a hidden architecture. Saving before spending, investing before consumption, letting minor wins compound into major ones. Over 2 decades, the difference is staggering. Not a factor of income, but of structure. This is the silent power of choice. This is why the system is unforgiving to those who misunderstand it, yet ruthlessly rewarding to those who master it. There is also an emotional element, often overlooked. Silent financial anxiety, the creeping worry that your money will never be enough, exists beneath the surface of seemingly controlled lives. It manifests in stress, in decisions that feel urgent but are strategically reckless, in purchases made to feel relief rather than generate value. The irony: the less aware you are of the invisible system, the more emotionally charged your financial decisions become. Fear, guilt, shame, all manipulated by your own environment, dictate outcomes more than intellect ever could. But there is a way out. Understanding the physics, the architecture, the silent system of financial compounding allows you to regain control. It begins with awareness. It escalates with strategy. It becomes unstoppable with discipline. And it will change everything once you see the patterns for what they are. The question is not whether you can earn more, spend less, or find a side hustle. The question is, can you see the invisible forces shaping your financial life? Because the moment you do, the rules change, and the choices you make from that point forward are no longer ordinary. They are transformative. By the end of this journey, you will understand the precise mechanisms that allow small, deliberate choices to create seismic shifts in your financial landscape. You will see how hidden structures, silent pressures, and compounding forces interact in ways almost nobody perceives. You will recognize the triggers, the habits, and the architecture that secretly control whether your money works for you or against you. And when this knowledge settles, you will face a choice: continue as before, trapped in the invisible system, or step into a methodical, strategic design that generates genuine freedom. But here's the tension. Most never take the first step. Not because they lack desire, but because the system has conditioned them to ignore it. They are blind to the subtleties, deaf to the signals, numb to the long-term consequences of small choices. Yet, for those willing to observe, willing to adapt, and willing to act deliberately, the hidden architecture becomes an ally. The iceberg that once threatened to sink them becomes the ladder that elevates them. In the next section, we will begin to dissect this architecture. We will expose the invisible mechanics that silently dictate your financial outcomes. No shame, no judgment, just clarity. This is the cognitive shift that precedes mastery. It is the moment where fear transitions into understanding, and understanding into power. The system waits. It is impartial, but it is precise. And the choice to step inside it, or remain outside, will determine the trajectory of your life for decades to come. The first secret of financial mastery is that money is never truly about money. This is counterintuitive, even heretical, in a world obsessed with income statements, investment apps, and budgeting spreadsheets. Money, in its essence, is information. It is a reflection of decisions made over time, a ledger of choices encoded into opportunity and consequence. And like any system of information, it obeys rules that are often invisible to those who rely solely on intuition or willpower. This is the architecture. This is the framework that silently governs why some people ascend to freedom while others remain trapped in cycles of anxiety, debt, and fleeting victories. Every financial outcome can be traced back to a series of micro-decisions, often unnoticed, yet exponentially powerful. Skipping a coffee may seem trivial. Opting to invest $50 a month instead may feel inconsequential. Yet these small vectors, when aligned with the system's architecture, accumulate into forces capable of moving mountains, or, if neglected, eroding stability without warning. This is where structure replaces luck, where compounding replaces hope, where freedom emerges not as a reward for effort, but as a consequence of alignment. Consider the concept of invisible leverage. In physics, a lever amplifies a small input force to move a massive object. In your financial life, invisible leverage is created by timing, habit, and strategy. The compound interest of behavior. Saving before spending is a lever. Automating investments is a lever. Avoiding impulsive decisions when social pressure peaks is a lever. The majority never discover these levers because they focus on the visible elements: salaries, bonuses, bank balances. They miss the machinery underneath, the gears that transform tiny actions into structural advantage. And the system is indifferent. It rewards precision and consistency, not awareness alone. This brings us to the first cognitive shift: understanding that shame is a waste of energy. If you're behind on savings, if your expenses exceed your intentions, if your debt grows faster than your investments, none of this is a moral failing. It is simply a misalignment with the invisible system. Blame and guilt are emotional distractions. They cloud judgment, distort incentives, and create the illusion that you must start over entirely to regain control. The truth is, the system is forgiving to those who observe and adapt. Recognition and recalibration, not shame, unlock freedom. Let's expose another structural mechanic: the compounding of avoidance. Financial decisions carry weight not just in the moment, but over months and years. Ignoring a $200 credit card balance is not a $200 problem. It is a ripple that interacts with interest, fees, and future behavioral decisions. This is how small negligence becomes systemic failure. Conversely, a small decision to act, pay down a balance, redirect a recurring expense, or automate a contribution, carries hidden exponential power. These decisions are invisible victories that accumulate silently, often unnoticed, even by the person making them, yet eventually manifest as enormous structural advantage. Behavior is the currency of compounding. Not money, not effort, but behavior. Repetition is the multiplier, and environment is the amplifier. The choice to schedule a weekly review of finances, to observe impulses without acting on them, to prioritize long-term outcomes over instant gratification. These are the foundational decisions that the system magnifies. And because most people undervalue these behaviors, the architecture often seems mysterious or arbitrary. It is not mysterious. It is simply ignored. Now, consider opportunity cost as a hidden tax imposed by inaction. Every dollar not strategically allocated, every habit not aligned with structural growth, every impulse that bypasses deliberate choice carries a hidden cost. The system records it quietly, invisibly, and compounds it against you. Few notice this tax because it is invisible until it becomes enormous. This is why incremental mastery matters more than sudden windfalls. The micro-decisions, day after day, form a lattice that either supports freedom or perpetuates limitation. There is also a psychological dimension to this architecture. Humans are wired to seek comfort, to prioritize immediate relief over long-term gain. This wiring is not an error. It is evolution, but it is a liability in modern financial systems. The system does not accommodate emotional impulses. It amplifies them. Small indulgences, unnoticed splurges, delayed contributions, these are the triggers that the architecture exploits. And if left unchecked, they accumulate silently, invisibly, creating the illusion of stagnation even when effort seems consistent. Yet here lies the power. Awareness is leverage. Once you identify the levers and understand the architecture, you no longer act blindly. You begin to perceive the invisible vectors that dictate outcomes. This perception is not motivation, it is strategy. Motivation fades. Strategy endures. And with strategic application, small, deliberate choices become unstoppable forces, capable of shaping your long-term trajectory in ways that sudden income increases, fancy tools, or external advice cannot. Micro-loops now emerge. Each decision begins a chain. A payment scheduled triggers discipline. Discipline reinforces habit. Habit compounds. Compounding generates advantage. But there is a tension. The system also punishes the smallest lapses. One unchecked impulse can reset progress in subtle ways. This is the duality. Freedom is built from tiny, consistent actions, yet destroyed by minor negligence. Understanding this balance is the first cognitive transformation necessary for true financial agency. The architecture also interacts with identity. Your financial behavior is an extension of your self-concept, consciously or unconsciously. Those who see themselves as incapable of discipline will sabotage progress before the system has a chance to reward them. Those who see themselves as capable of strategic patience will exploit the architecture naturally. Here is the insight few recognize. The system does not respond to your intentions. It responds to your identity-aligned actions. change the identity, and the small choices required for compounding freedom align automatically. By the end of this first module, one realization must sink in. Financial freedom is never sudden. It is invisible, structural, behavioral, and cumulative. It emerges from mastery over small choices within a well-understood architecture. Shame, impulsivity, and ignorance are irrelevant. What matters is observation, strategy, and alignment with the hidden system that governs your outcomes. And once this cognitive shift occurs, a door opens. Behind it lies the understanding of behavioral traps, the subtle mechanisms through which your mind, environment, and social pressures conspire to sabotage your wealth. That is the next frontier. Humans are remarkably adept at creating illusions of progress. They track visible metrics, bank balances, portfolio summaries, credit card statements, while ignoring invisible metrics, patterns of spending, the compounding effect of debt, the opportunity cost of choices deferred. This is why structural analysis is essential. Without it, even high earners find themselves trapped in cycles of stress and stagnation. The system is impartial. It rewards design, not perception. Behavioral leverage is one of the most powerful yet underutilized tools in this architecture. Consider the concept of decision inertia. Every time you automate a payment, redirect a recurring expense, or pre-commit to an investment, you remove friction from future behavior. This is invisible leverage in action. What appears as a small, almost trivial step in the present becomes a self-reinforcing advantage in the future. Conversely, neglecting this design ensures that every month is a battle against accumulated friction, small, unnoticed forces that chip away at potential freedom. Another dimension is the feedback loop of emotional triggers. Humans are wired to respond to cues, marketing, social pressure, scarcity messaging. These triggers bypass rational thought, pushing impulses that are immediately gratifying but structurally destructive. The architecture exploits these triggers relentlessly. Without conscious intervention, the system transforms minor indulgences into compounding setbacks. But awareness creates a buffer. By mapping emotional triggers and aligning behavior with structural goals, small choices, like waiting 24 hours before making non-essential purchases, begin to compound silently, producing leverage invisible to the casual observer. Here, we introduce the first practical framework: choice layering. Imagine your financial decisions stacked like geological strata. Each layer, spending, saving, investing, skill acquisition, interacts with the others. A weak layer, such as impulsive spending, undermines the entire formation. A strong layer, like automated investments, reinforces and multiplies the effect of other layers. The power of small choices lies not in isolation, but in their layered interaction. One micro-decision can cascade, creating structural momentum far beyond its nominal value. Consider a simple example: allocating $200 per month into an index fund. On the surface, it is $2,400 per year, insignificant compared to a salary of $80,000. But layered with automated discipline, avoidance of lifestyle inflation, and strategic skill accumulation, this $2,400 interacts with interest, compounding, and opportunity costs in ways that become exponential. 10 years later, the visible outcome is dramatic. Yet it originated from choices so small they almost felt inconsequential at the time. Structural patience is the next cognitive pillar. The system rewards deferred gratification, not through moral virtue, but through mathematical certainty. Each avoided impulse, each disciplined allocation, each conscious reinforcement of productive behavior functions like a small gear in a massive clock. Individually, the gears are minor. Together, they synchronize into unstoppable force. Yet patience is counterintuitive. Immediate feedback is absent. Results are invisible for years. This is why most abandon the process prematurely. The system does not reward impatience. It rewards structural fidelity. Environmental design is equally critical. The invisible system is sensitive to context. Surround yourself with peers who normalize overspending, and your choices face exponential resistance. Surround yourself with peers who practice structural discipline, and your small choices are amplified. The architecture is not isolated. It interacts with social, physical, and informational inputs. Mastery requires intentional manipulation of the environment to favor decisions aligned with long-term compounding. Here is the silent truth. The small choices you make daily are the only true measure of financial potential. Income, intelligence, and luck matter, but only insofar as they are harnessed within the system's invisible architecture. Every action, every micro-decision, either strengthens your leverage or erodes it. This is why awareness alone is insufficient. The first cognitive shift, the understanding of invisible architecture, is necessary but not sufficient. It must be combined with deliberate behavioral alignment, environmental control, and identity calibration. As we close this section, a crucial question emerges. If small, invisible choices carry this much power, why does almost everyone ignore them? The answer lies in behavioral psychology, a series of traps, emotional triggers, and status illusions that conspire to keep the system working against the majority. Understanding these traps is the next phase. It is here that you will begin to see how your mind, environment, and social programming silently sabotage wealth, even when effort seems consistent. To understand why financial freedom remains elusive for so many, we must confront the invisible snares embedded in human behavior. The system does not fail you. You fail within the behavioral framework it imposes. Yes, behavioral finance reveals a hidden architecture of traps, each designed not by malicious intent, but by the predictable tendencies of the human mind. These traps operate silently, shaping decisions before you're consciously aware of them. Understanding them is not optional, it is foundational. This is why most people, despite intelligence or income, never experience true financial leverage. The first trap is emotional spending. It masquerades as reward, relief, or necessity, but it is often a response to stress, social comparison, or fleeting desire. A $50 impulse purchase may seem trivial, yet it triggers a cascade of consequences. Money diverted from investment, incremental lifestyle inflation, and reinforcement of instant gratification. Your environment constantly signals urgency, limited time offers, social media envy, and peer pressure. Each signal subtly manipulates your behavior, compelling action that undermines structural advantage. Emotional spending is invisible, yet its consequences compound with the same mathematical force as deliberate investment. Next, consider the trap of identity-based financial self-sabotage. Your self-concept dictates the alignment of choices with long-term goals. If you believe you are not good with money, you unconsciously reinforce behaviors that validate that belief. Late payments, impulsive purchases, avoidance of investment opportunities all become identity-confirming acts. Conversely, those who internalize a disciplined, strategic identity align behavior automatically with structural leverage. Identity is the silent engine behind every choice. It is the difference between compounding in your favor and compounding against you. This is why the architecture punishes misaligned self-perception more consistently than ignorance. Status illusions form another powerful behavioral trap. Humans are wired to signal social value, often through consumption rather than investment. Consider the subtle pressures: friends upgrading cars, colleagues buying new electronics, influencers flaunting lifestyles beyond reach. These comparisons trigger micro-decisions to match appearances at the expense of structural wealth. The irony: What appears as enhancement of social standing often erodes long-term financial potential. This is where deliberate observation of triggers becomes critical. Once recognized, status illusions lose power. Once neutralized, as every small choice you make can be redirected toward leverage rather than validation. Loss aversion compounds these challenges. Studies in behavioral economics show humans fear loss roughly twice as intensely as they value equivalent gains. This fear manifests in procrastination, avoidance of calculated risk, and over-conservative decisions that stall compounding potential. Consider an investment opportunity with predictable long-term returns. Emotional evaluation may inflate perceived risk, while the structural reality favors participation. Those unaware of the gap between perception and system mechanics allow fear to dominate strategy, paying a silent tax in delayed growth. Temporal bias is another invisible mechanism. Immediate rewards disproportionately influence decisions compared to distant outcomes. Saving $200 a month may feel inconsequential, while a new gadget offers instant satisfaction. Yet the architecture of compounding rewards the patient and disciplined. Small, repeated allocations accumulate exponentially over years, but only if immediate impulses are subordinated. Understanding and mitigating temporal bias is therefore critical. It is the invisible lever that separates transient satisfaction from enduring freedom. The interaction between these traps amplifies risk. Emotional spending intensifies status illusions, which magnify temporal bias, which reinforces identity misalignment. Each layer compounds, creating structural friction that inhibits leverage. It is not a matter of intelligence or income. These psychological traps are agnostic to education, background, or talent. They exploit universal tendencies. And here lies the strategic insight. Awareness alone is insufficient. You must design interventions that preempt these triggers, neutralize compounding damage, and channel behavior toward structural advantage. One example illustrates this interaction. Imagine a professional earning $100,000 annually, faced with the latest tech gadget. Impulse triggers activate. Status comparison intensifies. Fear of missing out emerges. The purchase costs $1,500. On its own, it seems minor. But consider the compounded loss over 20 years, assuming that money could have been invested at an average 8% annual return. It grows to nearly $9,000. Add repeated instances, behavioral reinforcement, and identity confirmation, and the micro-decision begins to rival the effect of income discrepancies in shaping long-term wealth. The system silently punishes small indulgences that seem trivial in isolation. Behavioral traps also affect skill acquisition and income diversification. Humans naturally avoid complexity, risk, and delayed feedback. Learning a new skill to increase earning potential or understanding asset allocation requires effort with delayed payoff. Emotional inertia, identity misalignment, and loss aversion frequently override rational long-term incentives. The outcome: potential compounding engines, skills, side ventures, investments remain dormant. Meanwhile, impulsive consumption continues to compound against freedom, reinforcing the gap between intention and outcome. Social amplification further complicates matters. Your environment is not neutral. It exerts continuous influence on perception and action. Cultural norms, peer behavior, and even subtle cues in your living space reinforce immediate gratification and status signaling. Without conscious intervention, small choices are hijacked by the social architecture surrounding you. Here, structural mastery demands environmental design. Curating associations, automating decisions, and creating friction for detrimental impulses. When executed correctly, the environment becomes an ally, channeling behavior toward compounding advantage instead of sabotage. Finally, recognize the paradox. The very traps that generate failure are invisible until outcomes are visible. Debt accumulates slowly. Opportunity cost manifests years later. Skill gaps compound silently. Meanwhile, the majority misinterpret temporary victories or income spikes as progress. You unaware that micro-decisions are simultaneously undermining structural leverage. This tension, the delay between cause and visible effect, is precisely what allows disciplined small choices to eventually overwhelm the inertia of behavioral traps. In the next part, we will explore the mathematical backbone that makes these principles tangible. We will model compounding, escalation thresholds, and wealth velocity, revealing exactly how small, deliberate choices translate into exponential advantage. This is where theory becomes actionable and awareness becomes measurable power. The traps are formidable, but they are also predictable, quantifiable, and conquerable. To move from recognition to mastery, we must quantify the invisible patterns. Behavioral traps may seem abstract, but their consequences can be expressed with precision. Consider the principle of compounding losses caused by repeated behavioral misalignment. If an individual overspends by $100 monthly due to emotional triggers over a decade, that amounts to $12,000 in nominal dollars. Yet this figure underestimates the structural impact. Had the $100 been redirected toward disciplined investment at an average 7% annual return, the same amount compounds to roughly $21,000. The invisible system rewards alignment exponentially and punishes misalignment with silent, relentless efficiency. Identity alignment plays a pivotal role here. Individuals whose self-concept is incongruent with disciplined behavior rarely achieve compounding advantage. A person who identifies as a spender will unconsciously undermine investment strategies, ignore opportunities for skill stacking, and respond impulsively to social pressure. Conversely, those who adopt an identity aligned with structural growth find that small, deliberate decisions occur naturally. Paying off debt, automating investments, and evaluating expenses through the lens of opportunity cost becomes habitual. The system, indifferent in its mechanics, now rewards behavior instead of punishment. Another subtle trap is the illusion of linearity in financial outcomes. Many assume that wealth accumulation follows a steady, predictable trajectory. In reality, compounding operates non-linearly. Small choices create inflection points. A disciplined $50 monthly allocation may seem insignificant for years, then suddenly escalate, generating structural advantage that dwarfs initial efforts. The delay between cause and observable effect is a psychological friction point that allows the behavioral traps to remain unnoticed. Awareness of this nonlinear compounding is the key to preemptive action. Status illusions compound in similar ways. Consider lifestyle creep. A $20,000 annual raise is quickly absorbed by larger expenses, luxury goods, dining out, higher rent, leaving structural wealth largely unchanged. Here, the invisible architecture punishes conformity to social signals, even when income increases. The strategic response is to decouple identity from external validation, redirecting incremental resources into compounding systems rather than consumption. The difference between apparent progress and actual structural growth lies entirely in these small, deliberate choices. The system also exploits cognitive biases like anchoring and mental accounting. You may rationalize a $500 splurge because it is just 5% of my bonus, ignoring that the cumulative effect of multiple such decisions undermines leverage. Every decision is a node in a compounding network. Small errors propagate silently, creating structural drag. Conversely, pre-commitment and automation neutralize these biases. Automating savings and investments removes choice friction, preventing emotional or social impulses from hijacking the architecture. Each automated micro-action reinforces the invisible system, generating consistent momentum. Behavioral traps extend into risk perception as well. Loss aversion and fear of regret often lead to underinvestment in high-leverage opportunities. Individuals may avoid equity markets, buy entrepreneurial ventures, or skill acquisition due to emotional overvaluation of short-term losses. Yet the system rewards calculated risk, patience, and consistent application of compounding principles. By identifying the mismatch between perceived and structural risk, small, deliberate choices, like incremental portfolio contributions or controlled side project investment, become engines of exponential growth. Moreover, these behavioral traps interact in complex ways. Emotional spending amplifies identity misalignment, which heightens susceptibility to status illusions, which in turn reinforces temporal bias. Each layer compounds against the individual, yet remains invisible until observable consequences manifest decades later. The strategic insight is to disrupt this cycle at multiple points. Neutralize triggers, align identity, pre-commit behavior, and automate structural actions. These interventions convert potential loss into amplified leverage. To illustrate, imagine two professionals earning identical salaries, $80,000 annually. The first succumbs to behavioral traps, impulsive purchases, status-driven spending, procrastination on investment. The second employs structural interventions, automated savings, pre-committed investment allocations, mindful evaluation of social triggers. 10 years later, assuming a conservative 6% average annual return, the first may accumulate $50,000 in net assets, while the second surpasses $150,000. The gap is not income. It is the compounded effect of small, deliberate choices aligned with the architecture and the avoidance of behavioral traps. Environmental factors also magnify these outcomes. Living in communities or networks that normalize short-term consumption reinforces behavioral traps, while exposure to disciplined, structurally aligned peers amplifies beneficial behaviors. The system is not isolated. It responds to social, informational, and psychological inputs. By deliberately designing your environment, curating associations, limiting exposure to impulsive stimuli, and embedding friction against detrimental behavior, you leverage the architecture to favor compounding advantage rather than resistance. By the end of this section, the principle should be clear. The invisible system rewards alignment, patience, and deliberate behavior while punishing impulsivity, status-driven actions, and identity misalignment. Behavioral traps are universal, predictable, and conquerable, but only through awareness, environmental design, and micro-level discipline. The next step is where mathematics transforms strategy into tangible power, understanding compounding frameworks, capital thresholds, and wealth velocity. Here, the abstract principles of behavioral finance become actionable, measurable, and unstoppable. Now we enter the phase where abstraction becomes tangible. The mathematics of compounding, escalation thresholds, and wealth velocity. Understanding this framework is essential because awareness alone does not produce freedom. Application within a measurable system does. Small, deliberate choices, when mapped onto numerical realities, reveal an invisible engine capable of accelerating wealth far beyond intuition. This is where the invisible system rewards strategy with exponential precision. Consider compounding in its purest form. A single $100 monthly allocation invested at an average 8% annual return may seem negligible. Over 1 year, it accumulates roughly $1,200 plus $48 in interest. A minor impact, but extend this over 20 years, maintaining the discipline, and the number becomes $48,000 in contributions compounded to nearly $77,000. What once felt trivial now manifests as structural power. This is not magic. It is the predictable result of repeated aligned microactions interacting with a system that multiplies them over time. The mathematics is indifferent to emotion, status, or perceived difficulty. It responds only to alignment. Wealth velocity is the next critical concept. Unlike income, which is linear and constrained by time, wealth velocity measures the rate at which money moves through the system to generate additional resources. A $1,000 investment that produces $80 annually has low velocity. A $1,000 invested in skill acquisition, leveraged entrepreneurial ventures, or diversified assets compounds into far greater long-term outcomes, effectively increasing the velocity of capital. Small choices, investing consistently, reallocating dormant funds, or reinvesting returns, function as accelerators within this system, translating minor actions into disproportionate outcomes. Capital thresholds further amplify these effects. Below a certain threshold, compounding grows slowly. Above it, the system begins to escalate. Imagine an individual with $5,000 in investments, compounding at 8% annually. Growth is steady, but modest. Once that capital reaches $50,000, the same percentage return generates 10 times the absolute growth. This is why incremental accumulation, but often ignored as insignificant, is structurally vital. Small, repeated contributions are not linear. They form the basis for eventual exponential advantage once thresholds are crossed. Escalation examples reveal the psychological dimension of these thresholds. An individual who consistently saves $500 per month over 10 years may initially see slow growth. But as capital compounds, reinvested returns accelerate progress, eventually surpassing peers earning more but misaligned with the system. This is the silent power of leverage embedded in compounding mathematics. Income is finite. Time is finite. The system, however, rewards strategic patience and alignment with unlimited multiplicative potential. Consider a practical model. Two individuals, both investing $200 per month at an 8% return, but starting at different ages. Person A starts at age 25. Person B starts at 35. By age 55, Person A's disciplined approach yields over $175,000, while Person B accumulates just under $100,000. The 10-year delay of consistent action results in a staggering 75% gap, entirely due to compounding. This is not intuition, it is numerical inevitability. The system is impartial, precise, and unforgiving for delayed alignment. Now, integrate behavioral patterns into the equation. Emotional spending, status-driven indulgence, and procrastination function as negative multipliers, reducing the effective contribution to compounding. Conversely, disciplined microactions, automated investments, expense pre-commitment, and skill acquisition act as positive multipliers. The differential impact over decades becomes monumental. Small choices, when amplified by compounding and wealth velocity, create structural advantage that dwarfs episodic income gains. Leverage is another multiplier within this framework. Strategic leverage, borrowing at low cost to accelerate asset accumulation, or using time and skill to generate higher returns, magnifies compounding without increasing risk when applied correctly. Conversely, leverage abuse, high-interest debt, impulsive loans, or overextended financial commitments destroys wealth velocity with invisible but relentless efficiency. Understanding where to apply leverage, at what thresholds, and with what timing is central to translating micro decisions into macro outcomes. Timing also interacts with escalation thresholds. Investment windows, market cycles, and opportunity availability do not operate linearly. So capital positioned strategically at inflection points benefits from accelerated compounding, while misaligned timing delays outcomes for years. Small, deliberate preparation, research, skill accumulation, environmental scanning allows alignment with timing windows, converting ordinary capital into extraordinary outcomes. The architecture amplifies these moments. Those unprepared miss them, reinforcing behavioral disadvantage. Micro-optimization emerges as the final element in this phase. Regularly reviewing allocations, adjusting contributions, and recalibrating risk ensures that compounding efficiency is maximized. Small adjustments, redirecting $50 a month from low-return accounts to high-return opportunities, negotiating a slightly better interest rate, or reinvesting dividends, function as invisible accelerators within the system. So these choices, while minor in isolation, interact with capital thresholds, wealth velocity, and compounding to generate outsized long-term outcomes. By the end of this part, the principle is clear. The mathematics of compounding, when combined with strategic thresholds, velocity management, leverage, and timing, converts small, deliberate choices into exponential wealth. It is a system indifferent to intention, status, or emotion. Success emerges not from isolated intelligence, but from disciplined alignment with the architecture. Yet, even with understanding, the majority still fail. The next section will explore why intelligent, disciplined individuals often sabotage themselves despite clear strategy through social programming, lifestyle inflation, and environmental pressures. The traps are subtle, but understanding them is essential for sustainable financial freedom. Even with precise mathematical understanding, many fail because compounding is only one piece of the puzzle. The human mind, social environment, and subconscious programming exert forces that often override rational strategy. Consider two individuals with identical capital, identical contributions, and identical compounding rates. One achieves freedom. The other remains stagnant. The difference is not numbers. It is context, behavior, and subtle psychological factors operating beneath awareness. This is where strategy alone fails without understanding the systemic pressures acting on decision-making. Lifestyle inflation is the first culprit. So humans naturally adjust consumption in proportion to income, a phenomenon often rationalized as reward for hard work. A $10,000 raise can result in $9,500 of additional expenses. The system, impartial and precise, rewards those who resist this trap and punishes those who do not. Even high earners, unaware of the mechanics, can sabotage decades of compounding with incremental lifestyle creep. Here, the invisible system is merciless. Increased income without disciplined allocation produces negligible wealth growth despite apparent success. Environmental pressure compounds this effect. Social cues, peer behavior, and cultural norms signal what should be consumed, often incongruent with structural financial growth. Dinner outings, peer-driven vacations, mass and visible status symbols reinforce spending patterns that silently undermine compounding advantage. Behavioral economics labels this conformity bias, but its impact is structural, not incidental. Small choices made under social influence multiply over years, quietly eroding leverage even in highly intelligent individuals. Decision fatigue introduces another layer of vulnerability. Every choice, from mundane spending to major investment allocation, consumes cognitive resources. As mental energy depletes, default behaviors, often maladaptive, take over. The system exploits this by embedding micro-decisions throughout daily life: subscription renewals, minor purchases, habitual consumption. Those unprepared experience structural drag, while those who automate or pre-commit align behavior with long-term compounding, but bypassing fatigue traps entirely. Consider a scenario. An individual earns $120,000, has mastered basic compounding principles, but lives in a high-pressure social environment. Every week, they face invitations, peer comparisons, and cultural expectations to match consumption. Cognitive resources fluctuate. Emotional impulses are triggered. Despite understanding compounding, the individual overspends $500 monthly on non-essential items. Over a decade, this behavior alone diminishes net wealth by tens of thousands, erasing progress that could have been achieved through disciplined alignment. The system is not random. It is systematically precise in punishing misaligned behavior. Psychological programming reinforces this dynamic. Humans are wired for short-term reward, status signaling, and immediate gratification. Even when individuals intellectually understand long-term advantage, emotional architecture often dominates. This is why intelligent people, armed with knowledge, still fail. Knowledge without behavioral integration is insufficient. The invisible system punishes inconsistency, impatience, and identity misalignment, regardless of intellect or intent. Structural interventions become essential. Automating savings, pre-committing to investments, and designing friction against impulsive choices neutralizes environmental and psychological pressure. Small micro-actions, repeated consistently, act as stabilizing forces within the system. Each automated allocation compounds over time, creating leverage that is invisible in the moment, but unstoppable across decades. The architecture rewards alignment and punishes deviation with mathematical precision. Another subtle yet devastating factor is comparison-based self-sabotage. Observing peers with higher visible wealth often triggers accelerated consumption in an attempt to keep up, regardless of actual need. This behavior may temporarily assuage emotional anxiety, but undermines compounding and structural advantage. Awareness alone is insufficient. Deliberate behavioral design and identity recalibration are required to neutralize this trap. Identity-aligned action ensures that every choice, however small, serves the compounding architecture rather than social validation. Finally, consider the interplay of multiple subtle pressures: lifestyle inflation, environmental cues, decision fatigue, and social comparison. Alone, each is manageable. Combined, they create a structural force capable of negating decades of disciplined compounding. The system is impartial but unforgiving. It does not consider effort, only alignment. This is why mastery requires not only mathematical understanding, but also psychological and environmental calibration. Small choices must be strategically insulated against pressure, emotion, and fatigue to ensure that compounding advantage manifests fully. In the next section, we will explore practical frameworks to overcome these pressures. We will quantify capital thresholds, model compounding across multiple asset types, and reveal wealth velocity strategies that convert awareness and behavior into measurable, unstoppable advantage. Here, theory intersects with application, and the invisible architecture becomes tangible leverage capable of generating exponential outcomes. Even the most intelligent, disciplined individuals often fail, not because they lack knowledge, but because they underestimate the invisible forces shaping behavior. Understanding this requires looking beyond numbers into the realm of social programming, lifestyle inflation, and environmental pressure. Here, decision fatigue and subtle psychological forces collide with financial strategy, often silently dismantling compounding advantage. Social programming is the first, most insidious factor. From childhood, humans are conditioned to equate consumption with status, security, or identity. The system leverages this programming daily. Advertisements, peer behaviors, and cultural narratives constantly reinforce the notion that material accumulation is the measure of success. Even with knowledge of compounding, the subconscious pull toward consumption creates friction. Every dinner out, every latest gadget, every weekend indulgence carries a small but cumulative structural cost. The invisible architecture rewards restraint, but social programming ensures it is rarely applied consistently. Lifestyle inflation compounds this further. Income growth, promotions, and bonuses are celebrated culturally, yet they create subtle pressures to expand consumption proportionally. The problem is not luxury itself, It is the incremental alignment of desires with income increases rather than structural advantage. A $20,000 raise absorbed entirely by lifestyle creep may leave net savings unchanged, while a disciplined allocation of even a portion dramatically accelerates compounding. The system is impartial. Rewards emerge only when incremental income is strategically leveraged, not merely spent. Decision fatigue operates as a silent antagonist. Each financial choice consumes cognitive energy. Early in the month, individuals may exercise discipline. By mid-month, mental resources wane, emotional impulses dominate, and spending decisions default to convenience or social expectation. The system exploits this predictable depletion. Without automation, pre-commitment, and friction design, even intelligent individuals will unconsciously erode wealth velocity. Small, repeated lapses accumulate invisibly, and over years, the cumulative effect can negate decades of strategic gains. Environmental pressure is equally potent. Humans are influenced by the visible behaviors and expectations of peers. Networks that normalize frequent consumption, rapid lifestyle upgrades, or debt accumulation generate invisible drag. Even those fully aware of compounding mathematics may subconsciously mirror these behaviors, undercutting structural advantage. Conversely, environments that normalize discipline, automation, and delayed gratification amplify the effect of small, deliberate choices. Mastery requires intentional manipulation of context to support, rather than sabotage, compounding behavior. Consider the paradox of intelligent failure. High-income earners, armed with knowledge, can be the most susceptible to these forces. Cognitive bias leads them to overestimate control, underestimate environmental pressure, and rationalize incremental indulgence as harmless. Each lapse, minor in isolation, compounds over years. By the time consequences become visible, they appear disproportionate, yet they were entirely predictable within the system. This is why understanding social, psychological, and environmental pressures is as crucial as mastering compounding itself. Temporal discounting further undermines strategy. Humans prioritize immediate satisfaction over distant gain, a principle rooted in evolutionary psychology. This bias subtly influences every financial decision. Delaying a $200 monthly investment for a short-term luxury feels rational in the moment, but undermines long-term compounding. The architecture is indifferent to emotion. Delayed alignment is punished, and early alignment is rewarded exponentially. Strategic mastery requires the ability to override temporal bias consistently, use converting small choices into long-term leverage. Micro-loops emerge here as both challenge and solution. Repeated lapses reinforce impulsivity and status-driven behavior, creating structural inertia that resists compounding. Yet, deliberate interventions, automated contributions, pre-committed spending frameworks, and environmental design generate positive loops that multiply over time. Each small choice becomes a node in a network of compounding advantage, resistant to social, emotional, and environmental sabotage. Mastery is the ability to engineer these loops while neutralizing the negative ones. Financial stress and anxiety are also amplified by these dynamics. Unchecked social comparison, lifestyle pressure, and accumulated decision fatigue create a chronic sense of scarcity, even when income or wealth is sufficient. This emotional stress often drives impulsive consumption, reinforcing negative loops within the system. Recognition of this mechanism allows deliberate intervention. By designing behavior, automating processes, and insulating choices from social triggers, anxiety is transformed from a destructive force into a signal for recalibration. By the end of this section, the pattern is clear. Intelligence and knowledge are insufficient without environmental, social, and psychological alignment. The architecture is precise. It amplifies alignment and punishes deviation. Those unaware of lifestyle inflation, social pressure, And decision fatigue will repeatedly sabotage even disciplined compounding. The next section, the Strategic Wealth Blueprint, will transition from awareness to actionable systemization. Here, deliberate capital structure, asset allocation, and risk mitigation transform small, disciplined choices into structural, unstoppable advantage. Now that we have dissected the invisible architecture, the behavioral traps, and the mathematics of compounding, it is time to construct a strategic wealth blueprint. A deliberate, step-by-step framework designed to transform small choices into structural freedom. This blueprint is not a generic guide. It is a system engineered to exploit the invisible mechanics, leverage compounding, and neutralize the psychological and environmental pressures that sabotage most people. The first pillar is capital structure. Every dollar must have purpose. The blueprint divides capital into 3 functional layers: operational liquidity, strategic investments, and long-term growth assets. Operational liquidity covers immediate needs and safety, preventing emotional spending from triggering destructive compounding effects. Strategic investments are high-leverage allocations designed to exploit compounding and wealth velocity. Long-term growth assets, real estate, equity portfolios, or skill-enhancing ventures serve as engines of structural escalation. The architecture amplifies alignment across these layers, rewarding disciplined allocation. Risk mitigation is the second pillar. Intelligent diversification reduces the impact of systemic shocks while preserving compounding momentum. The blueprint employs calibrated exposure. High-risk opportunities are allocated at thresholds that maximize potential returns without compromising structural stability. Low-risk, high-consistency instruments form the base, providing steady reinforcement. By integrating risk management into every layer, the system allows small, consistent actions to accumulate without catastrophic setbacks. Micro misalignments no longer snowball into irreversible damage. Skill stacking constitutes the third pillar. Your capacity to generate income and leverage opportunity is limited by skill, not desire. The blueprint emphasizes incremental structured skill acquisition aligned with wealth acceleration. Each skill functions as a compounding asset. The more versatile and strategically aligned your skill set, the higher your wealth velocity and capital deployment efficiency. Small, deliberate investments in learning, coding, financial literacy, negotiation, or asset management multiply structural advantage over decades, far beyond isolated financial contributions. So cash flow architecture is the fourth pillar. Understanding the flow of money is as crucial as its accumulation. The blueprint separates inflows from outflows, allocating surplus strategically toward compounding assets rather than consumption. Automated systems, pre-commitment strategies, and micro-budgeting ensure that each dollar reinforces structural advantage. Wealth velocity accelerates when money is consciously directed, rather than passively spent or siphoned by behavioral traps. Here, small choices, like redirecting minor windfalls into investments, create outsized effects over time. The fifth pillar is long-term asymmetry thinking. Structural advantage requires decisions that prioritize magnitude over immediacy. This involves pre-committing to high-leverage actions even when returns are delayed. By understanding that the invisible system magnifies consistency over flash, consider strategic reinvestment of dividends or incremental skill application. These small choices accumulate invisible advantage that eventually dominates linear strategies. Asymmetry thinking transforms ordinary contributions into extraordinary outcomes. The blueprint integrates timing and thresholds. Capital allocations are not static. They adjust based on opportunity, risk tolerance, and environmental context. Micro-adjustments, shifting from low-yield savings to higher-return vehicles, or strategically leveraging debt when cost of capital advantages emerge, ensure compounding remains optimized. The system is dynamic, but the principles are structural. Each small choice interacts with thresholds, velocity, and leverage to maximize long-term outcomes. Environmental design reinforces the blueprint. The system rewards alignment, yet the environment can sabotage otherwise perfect execution. The blueprint prescribes intentional curation of social, informational, and behavioral surroundings. This includes peer networks, automated reminders, friction against impulsive spending, and exposure to opportunities that reinforce long-term thinking. Small, deliberate interventions in environment act as amplifiers for all other pillars, converting awareness into action and compounding. At the foundation, identity alignment underpins every pillar. The strategic wealth blueprint assumes that behavior is an extension of identity. Those who internalize strategic patience, structural discipline, and delayed gratification will execute the blueprint naturally. Those misaligned with this identity must engage in conscious recalibration, mapping triggers, reinforcing strategic behavior, and neutralizing impulses before the system can operate at full efficiency. Identity is the lever that transforms abstract blueprint into real, unstoppable financial momentum. By the end of this module, the architecture is no longer theoretical. Each small choice, allocation, skill acquisition, automation, environmental adjustment, fits into a cohesive, layered structure. The invisible system that once punished misalignment now becomes an ally, amplifying deliberate actions into tangible freedom. Yet, understanding the blueprint is only the beginning. The next phase, the acceleration phase, introduces dual-engine strategies to multiply income and asset velocity simultaneously, and ensuring that small choices scale into transformational outcomes. With the strategic wealth blueprint in place, the next stage is acceleration. Here, small, disciplined choices are no longer incremental. They begin to interact, amplify, and multiply across two synchronized engines: income generation and asset accumulation. This is where the invisible system rewards alignment with exponential precision. The architecture now shifts from foundation building to velocity creation, where timing, leverage, and optionality converge to produce structural advantage. The first engine is income optimization. While compounding can work on existing capital, the rate of accumulation is limited by the flow of resources entering the system. Small choices in income, negotiating raises, pursuing skill-enhancing projects, is leveraging networks, create disproportionately large compounding potential when redirected strategically. Each dollar earned is evaluated not for immediate consumption, but for its ability to feed the second engine: assets. This dual-engine approach transforms ordinary income into a catalyst for structural acceleration. The second engine is asset deployment. Capital alone does not generate leverage without strategic allocation. Investments, entrepreneurial ventures, real estate, and diversified portfolios are selected not merely for returns, but for interaction with wealth velocity and compounding thresholds. Each allocation decision functions like a microgear in a vast engine, automated, pre-committed, and strategically timed. Small, deliberate actions, reinvesting dividends, reinvesting profits, or deploying skill-based leverage, generate cascading acceleration over time. Optionality is the amplifier within this phase. By maintaining multiple pathways to wealth creation, side projects, passive income streams, investment opportunities, the system reduces the risk of stagnation and maximizes compounding potential. Small choices, such as testing a side venture or exploring a new market niche, create structural options that can later be scaled. Each decision adds a node to a web of opportunity, increasing the probability that a single aligned choice will trigger outsized returns. The architecture magnifies these moments when preparation and timing intersect. Leverage, when applied strategically, transforms the system further. Proper leverage, borrowing at low cost, using skill to amplify outcomes, is or engaging capital in high-velocity opportunities magnifies gains without proportionally increasing risk. Misapplied leverage, conversely, erodes structural advantage silently and relentlessly. This is where discipline and blueprint alignment are critical. Small, calculated leverage amplifies wealth velocity, while impulsive or uncalibrated leverage destroys compounding potential. The system is impartial. It rewards precision and punishes deviation. Timing becomes a structural tool. Opportunities rarely arrive evenly. Markets fluctuate, ventures open and close, and skill-based opportunities appear in cycles. Small, deliberate preparation, research, network cultivation, and financial readiness positions you to exploit these timing windows. Capital thresholds interact with timing. A small pool of ready resources can convert fleeting opportunities into transformational outcomes, while unprepared individuals watch advantage slip away. Here, the system amplifies foresight and penalizes delay. Dual-engine coordination is the next subtle yet powerful lever. Income and asset engines must operate synergistically. Each additional dollar of income is directed toward strategic assets, and each asset return feeds back into income-generating capacity. This feedback loop increases wealth velocity exponentially. Minor decisions, redirecting a bonus into an investment vehicle, or applying a new skill to generate supplemental revenue, interact with systemic mechanics to magnify outcomes far beyond linear expectations. Optionality layering reinforces resilience. By cultivating multiple avenues for income and growth, small missteps are absorbed without catastrophic loss. A failed side project does not destroy compounding momentum because the other engines continue operating. The invisible architecture rewards those who build redundancy into opportunity structures, ensuring continuous growth even amid environmental or psychological pressure. Small choices in diversifying effort now function as structural insurance. Micro-calibration is essential. Every month, small adjustments, shifting allocations, adjusting risk exposure, or automating new saving streams fine-tune the acceleration engines. The system multiplies these adjustments across compounding cycles. Neglecting micro-calibration introduces inefficiencies that compound against long-term velocity. Here, discipline, awareness, and deliberate action converge. Minor interventions generate outsized structural advantage over decades. By the end of this module, the dual-engine system is operational. Small choices are no longer isolated. They interact, amplify, and cascade. The invisible architecture, once a neutral or adversarial force, now functions as an ally, magnifying deliberate action into tangible freedom. The next section, identity evolution, transitions from structural mechanics to internal transformation, enabling sustained adherence to the blueprint and acceleration engines over decades. Here, psychology becomes leverage itself, ensuring that small, deliberate choices are executed consistently without fatigue, emotional deviation, or environmental sabotage. The acceleration engines are powerful, but without internal alignment, they remain vulnerable. Use even the most meticulously constructed systems. Compounding, leverage, optionality can be sabotaged by identity misalignment. True wealth mastery requires a psychological recalibration, the internalization of delayed gratification, structural patience, and strategic detachment. Here, behavior is no longer effortful. It becomes an automatic reflection of a new self-concept. This is identity evolution. At its core, identity evolution reframes the relationship between action and self-perception. Financial behavior is rarely a product of knowledge alone. It is an extension of the self. A person who identifies as impulsive will unconsciously make choices that undermine compounding, velocity, and leverage. A person who identifies as structurally disciplined, who sees themselves as a long-term strategist, aligns choices with architecture automatically. Small, deliberate actions are no longer decisions. They are expressions of identity. This is the subtle, yet transformative leverage point few recognize. Delayed gratification becomes a central tenet. Humans naturally prioritize immediate reward, a vestige of evolutionary survival wiring. The invisible system punishes this bias while rewarding strategic patience. By consciously adopting an identity aligned with deferred reward, seeing satisfaction not in instant consumption, but in structural alignment, behavior begins to follow automatically. Small, repeated sacrifices become effortless because they are no longer sacrifices. They are expressions of who you are. Coffee skipped. The automated investments executed. Discretionary expenses deferred. They now reinforce identity rather than challenge it. Strategic detachment is the second pillar. The evolved identity does not seek validation through status, comparison, or external approval. Emotional triggers lose power because the self-concept is anchored in structural alignment, not perception. Status illusions, lifestyle inflation, and social pressure no longer dictate decisions. The architecture magnifies this effect. When behavior is identity-aligned, compounding, velocity, and leverage operate without friction. Small choices, previously compromised by emotion or comparison, become automatic contributions to long-term freedom. Thinking in decades, not months, is the final dimension of identity evolution. Most individuals operate on short horizons, yet evaluating success through transient metrics, monthly balances, annual bonuses, visible possessions. The evolved identity measures wealth and freedom in structural impact, not immediate gratification. Small choices, redirecting $200 a month, automating, investing in skills, are contextualized as part of a decades-long trajectory. Patience is no longer difficult. It is natural. The system rewards this horizon exponentially as minor misalignments are absorbed and aligned actions compound relentlessly. Environmental reinforcement is critical for sustaining identity evolution. The mind mirrors surroundings. Networks, media, and cultural cues shape behavior subtly. The evolved self curates its environment. Peers who reinforce structural thinking, systems that automate discipline, and exposures that amplify delayed gratification. To small environmental interventions like automated bill payments, pre-committed investment channels, and peer networks emphasizing skill growth over consumption, function as externalized extensions of identity. They reduce cognitive load, reinforce consistency, and amplify long-term compounding. Micro-loops of reinforcement emerge. Each identity-aligned action strengthens self-perception, which in turn reinforces future-aligned actions. Skipping a purchase, automating savings, or redirecting income into assets now produces internal validation, reducing susceptibility to behavioral traps. The invisible architecture multiplies these loops over time. The longer the alignment persists, the less effort required, and the greater the structural advantage generated by the same micro-actions. Even setbacks are reframed. Identity evolution transforms errors from crises into signals. A misallocated investment, a temporary indulgence, or an unanticipated expense does not trigger guilt, shame, or derailment. Instead, it becomes data for recalibration. The system punishes misalignment less when behavior is anchored in identity, because corrective actions are more likely to be executed immediately, preserving compounding momentum. Small, deliberate adjustments recover lost leverage and restore alignment seamlessly. By the end of this module, identity evolution has internalized the principles of strategic patience, detachment, and horizon thinking. The individual is no longer fighting against impulses, environmental pressures, or social programming. Small, deliberate choices, once vulnerable to emotional sabotage, are now automatic expressions of self. The invisible architecture amplifies these choices exponentially, ensuring consistent execution across decades. The next section, wealth redefinition, transforms this structural and psychological mastery into a broader conceptual framework. Here, wealth is no longer measured in income or assets alone. Freedom, power, and security are redefined through structural alignment, identity integrity, and compounding advantage. Small choices now interact with a redefined understanding of success, producing a holistic, unstoppable trajectory toward financial freedom. By now, the mechanics, psychology, and strategy of wealth are firmly established. Compounding, acceleration engines, identity evolution, each has been internalized and operationalized. Yet true mastery requires a conceptual transformation, redefining wealth itself. And most people equate wealth with income, possessions, or status. This narrow definition is precisely what allows the invisible system to control them. Structural freedom demands a broader, more strategic framework. Wealth is not what you earn, it is what you control, sustain, and multiply. The first principle of redefinition is freedom over income. High earnings alone do not confer power. They are often traps disguised as progress. Someone earning 6 figures can be debt-bound, over-leveraged, and enslaved to lifestyle pressures. Real wealth is the ability to allocate resources according to strategic priorities, independent of social or emotional pressures. Small choices, redirecting income into assets, automating contributions, and resisting lifestyle inflation, transform apparent income into structural freedom. The system rewards this alignment, silently accelerating compounding through disciplined control. The second principle is power beyond status. Many pursue wealth to signal value, influence, or social approval. Status-based wealth is fragile, vulnerable to comparison, envy, and social shifts. Structural power is internalized. It is the capacity to act with autonomy, leverage opportunity, and execute strategy without external validation. Every small decision, investing in skill, reallocating capital, or deferring consumption, strengthens this invisible form of power. The architecture amplifies these choices exponentially because internal alignment eliminates friction, maximizing velocity and leverage. The third principle is security through structural resilience. Wealth is often mistaken for accumulation of assets alone, but without systemic balance, exposure to risk can undo decades of compounding. Structural wealth integrates diversification, risk thresholds, and optionality into every decision. Small, deliberate actions, building emergency buffers, leveraging low-cost debt strategically, maintaining multiple income streams, create a resilient system. The invisible architecture magnifies these interventions, ensuring continuity and momentum even under unforeseen stress. Fourth is the reframing of consumption itself. True wealth is not measured by what is spent, but by what is preserved, leveraged, and aligned with compounding advantage. Every minor choice to defer gratification, automate investment, or redirect surplus from immediate reward into structural assets compounds silently. The system amplifies these micro-actions. A $50 monthly diversion into a growth vehicle may seem trivial, yet across decades it produces outsized structural impact. Wealth is therefore redefined not as a snapshot of spending, but as a network of aligned choices generating freedom over time. Fifth, influence is integrated into the redefinition. Wealth is now understood as the capacity to shape one's environment, leverage networks, and create optionality. Small, deliberate actions, mentoring, networking, skill sharing, or investing in others produce cascading advantages. The architecture multiplies influence because it aligns the individual with systemic leverage points. Unlike superficial status, these interactions feed velocity, reinforce identity alignment, and amplify compounding. Sixth, longevity thinking reframes time itself as an asset. Structural wealth measures success across decades, not fiscal years. Each micro-decision is evaluated not for its immediate impact, but for its long-term contribution to compounding, velocity, and optionality. The system, indifferent to short-term desire, magnifies patient, consistent action. Those who redefine wealth through temporal alignment achieve exponential advantage over peers focused on transient metrics. Finally, the synthesis of these principles transforms perception. Wealth becomes a multidimensional construct. Freedom, power, security, influence, and time-aligned compounding. Small choices, each seemingly inconsequential, operate within a coherent architecture, producing outcomes disproportionate to visible effort. The invisible system no longer operates as a hidden force against you. It becomes a multiplier, translating aligned action into structural advantage and long-term financial freedom. This redefinition closes the conceptual loop. Understanding and internalizing wealth in this way ensures that every subsequent choice, behavior, and strategy reinforces freedom, not merely accumulation. The next and final section, Challenge plus Ascension Close, will synthesize all principles into a direct, emotionally compelling call to action. Here, awareness, strategy, identity, and redefined wealth converge, compelling execution at the highest level. You now stand at the threshold where understanding becomes action. The invisible system, once a silent adversary, has been revealed. Behavioral traps, lifestyle pressures, social programming, and temporal bias no longer operate in the shadows. Compounding, capital thresholds, wealth velocity, dual-engine acceleration, identity evolution, and redefined wealth, each principle has been exposed, quantified, and strategically aligned. The blueprint is complete. But knowledge alone will not create freedom. Action will. The challenge is simple but profound. Begin today with the smallest deliberate choice and ensure it is aligned with the architecture. Automate one investment. Redirect one expense. Learn one skill. Each micro-action is a node in a network that multiplies silently over time. The invisible system will amplify it if aligned, or punish it if ignored. Your future self is waiting, not in abstract terms, but as a structure built from each precise decision you make now. Visualize yourself decades from now. Wealth is no longer a number. It is freedom of choice, security unshakable, influence unconstrained, and life measured in structural leverage, not transient status. The small choices you make today, consistent, deliberate, aligned, will have generated momentum far beyond what seems possible in the moment. The architecture rewards patience, identity alignment, and strategic action. Every day delayed is opportunity lost. Every deliberate action compounds invisibly. This is your direct call to action. Commit to the system, align behavior with identity, and let the invisible architecture work in your favor. No more waiting for perfect conditions. No more rationalizing delay. No more allowing social or emotional friction to dictate your trajectory. The principles are clear. The blueprint exists, and the pathways are measurable. Where execution is the only remaining variable, and it is within your control. Remember this: the invisible system does not negotiate. It only amplifies alignment. Small choices, repeated, deliberate, and identity-aligned, will produce outcomes that feel impossible until they are realized. The compounding power you now understand is impartial, precise, and relentless. It is waiting for your action. The moment to start is not tomorrow, not next week. It is this exact moment, with the choices you make now. Take the step. Make the choice. Let the invisible system become your ally. Align, execute, and ascend. Every small action compounds. Every deliberate decision builds structural freedom. This is the path few see, fewer understand, and even fewer follow to completion. You now have the map, the principles, and the strategy. All that remains is to act. Your freedom is constructed one small choice at a time. Begin, and the system will carry you farther than imagination allows.